Thank you very much, Lesia, for this lovely introduction. It's a really great pleasure for me to be a guest in today's meeting. That's really something very special for me to deliver this workshop for the Ukrainian Toastmasters clubs. I'm member of two clubs in London. The one is the Polish-speaking Polish Your Polish. The second is City Limits. Both are from London. I also run my own business e-learning company, the Manka Academy. We focus mainly on developing, helping people develop their businesses. But today we'll be talking about a very special topic, which is storytelling. Storytelling, which became one of this, hot topic in business, in public speaking, in freelancing, in marketing, in advertisement, and actually storytelling is part of our experience, our individual experience, and our collective experience. And today we'll go through some hopefully interesting aspects of storytelling, so that you could apply in your public speaking career. If you run your business, perhaps it could help you to develop your business faster. And but also, storytelling is a great tool to simply to build better relationship. And we'll today examine a few different aspects of storytelling. But let's start with a kind of typology of storytelling. I mean, I believe that I studied cinema, I studied literature, so I'm quite familiar with different kind of types of stories, the way how we can convey messages through stories, how we can structure stories. And after after a kind of careful considerations, I came to the conclusion that we've got three types of stories. The first, probably the most important, are classical stories. All these great stories starting from ancient times, biblical stories, ancient Roman and Greek myth. We've got, great religious books about the meaning of life, about the battle between evil and good, about the deep meaning and the I would say how we can actually think about lives, about what we do here, what is our purpose, and about amazing conflicts, sometimes cosmic conflicts. And then we've got great stories throughout the Middle Ages, Renaissance, a great time for, especially for great novels in 19th century. So I would say if we want to really be familiar with storytelling, and if you want to really understand the nature of stories, the greatness of stories, and how to construct a great stories, I think I would start with this first type of stories, which is classical stories. And the second type we'll be talking today most of the time are business stories. Business stories are slightly less complex. They are simpler simply because there is not, when you want to tell a story on your website, or if you want to use a story when you have a presentation, or you want to use a story in your marketing campaign, then of course you don't have so much time and so much space to build very complex stories. So certainly business stories are slightly less complex, but it might be also absolutely powerful and can have a great impact on our perception and the way how we can perceive brands or products or services or just our colleagues who run businesses or run certain projects. So we'll talk about most of the time about the second type today, about business stories, but we've got also a third kind of type of stories, a very special one. I think that I was thinking recently about how can I have a proper impact. One of my big life ambitions is to be a great father, daddy for my kids. This is really important for me. And I was recently thinking again about what I can implement to build better relationship with them, how I can be better listener to better understand what, they are now in the preteen age. So as you can imagine, there are more and more challenges. And one of the things that I suddenly understood is that the best story you can tell to your kids are not necessarily classical stories, which are of course very important, or stories that you can tell them to inspire them or help them grow or understand certain, let's say, challenging or complex aspects of our lives. I realized that actually the best story I can tell them is the story that I can convey through my life, which is very difficult, because that means that I need to, kind of follow by example. I need to be a great example for them. But actually, to be a great example is to tell them all the time, whatever you do, whatever you say, however you behave, and whatever decisions you make, is basically you tell them all the time a story throughout your life. We've got, and I think this is the most powerful way we can have impact on our families, our friends. But the stories can be also told not only by individuals, it can be told also by nations. And now we are witnessing a great stories told by Ukrainian people, the great stories about courage, about defending their freedom, about their sacrifice, about their greatness, about there are a lot of things that we can read every day in newspapers, on website. We can watch TV, and this is a story that inspire people. Of course, first of all, we've got a lot of compassion. We know that our brothers and sisters in Ukraine, first of all, need help and support, but also they inspire us, because they maybe they don't think about their lives as the kind of art of storytelling, but they tell amazing stories as well. And this is something that I suddenly realized some time ago. And I think this third type of story is something perhaps the most difficult, the most demanding, and the most complex way to have impact. But let's have a look at, let's start with two very simple example to compare, how story can have, let's do a comparison between the impact that story might have on our perception of certain events or certain people versus a statement. So we very often, when we want to say something about ourselves or say something about, our friends, we can choose to, let's say that someone asked me what I believe is the most important, my trait of my character. So let's say that I choose to say I'm brave. So when I say that I'm brave, and if you are my friend, or if you know me very well, perhaps you could believe me. If you don't know me, actually, you don't know what to do with this information, because it's just a statement. But instead of, just making a statement, because this is what we do, I would say, most of the time, especially when the conversations are very formal or very quick. We don't have enough time to go through some, complexities of our life. But what if I, instead of telling that I'm brave, choose to answer differently? So let's say that my answer would looks like this. So I was 5 years old. I woke up in the middle of the night. My heart was racing. And normally, when I slept as a child, the door was never closed, and there was, always a small gap in the doors with a gentle beam of light. But this time, it was complete darkness and silence. And suddenly, I heard a strange, unusual noise coming from downstairs. And despite of a paralyzing fear, I was able to stand up from my bed. I was shaking, but managed to go into the corridor. and then I grabbed a big bat that was a part of a big flower decoration in the corner of the corridor. Then I carefully went down. My heart raced like crazy, and I breathed heavily. And I anxiously reached the light switch. And when the room flooded with light, I heard the jubilant voices of my family, and I saw them coming in. It was my parents and Uncle John and Auntie Mary coming in the middle of the night because of their late plane arrival. So when we compare these two statements, I think you will agree with me that the second way to say that I'm brave is probably much more interesting. It's much more engaging and much more, I persuaded you slightly better when I told the story. We can also, let's have a look at the second example. As business owners or as people who work, let's say, in the marketing or client service departments, we very often like to tell our potential prospective customers that we love our customers. This is what we do because we care about our businesses, about our companies. So I can say that I love my customers, or instead of just making only this simple statement, because you don't need to believe me, actually. Again, if you don't know me, if you don't know my business, you've never interacted with me, you can believe me, but you can also just remain a little bit uncertain, right? But I can tell a story instead of just telling you that our company, I love my customers. I can choose to tell a story, and story might be about, let's say, Alice, who a week before Christmas purchased a very expensive album with let's say a beautiful ancient art. And then she called us the day before Christmas, and she said that book hadn't arrived. So when I spoke with her, she sounded very worried. Her voice was a little bit down, and she was keep repeating, what I will do now. Oh my goodness, what I will do now. Oh my goodness. And she really sounded devastated. And she told us that this gift, this book, was very important because it was going to be a very important moment for her family. Their parents were meeting for the first time in 10 years. So it was a very special occasion to give them this amazing album. So what we did, we spoke with our delivery team. We used a special one-day delivery and offer Alice an additional copy of this beautiful album for free. So when I tell this story, when I publish this story, instead of telling that we love our customers, or a part of telling that we love our customers, or I love my customers, I think the impact of the story will be much greater. And the reason is because when we listen to a story, we feel engaged. We feel like if we were in the middle of these events. It looks like the human beings are wired to storytelling, and the storytelling is, the one of the most effective way to persuade people, to convey certain messages, to sell, and to simply build good relationship. Because through storytelling, we can communicate certain ideas, especially difficult ones or complex ones, much more effective. So what I would suggest in the beginning is to, if some of you are interested in applying, storytelling principles in your lives, you can just start collecting stories from your life, from life of your friends, from books you read, from movies you watched. And you can also, invent some stories. You can create your own original stories and simply do a kind of a catalog of your stories with short information about what kind of message it conveys. And this exercise, if it's done systematically on a daily basis, it will bring you a lot of joy in your life. It will make you much more effective with your, especially business endeavors, but also with your public speaking career, because when we tell a story through, when we've got our speaking slots and we choose to tell a story, then certainly an impact. Or today we'll have a table topic session. So if we are able sometimes to come up with a story, then certainly impact potentially might be much greater in comparison to, let's say, to presenting only facts or data. And this exercise, I mean, to compare a story with a statement with a story, we'll do in the further part of our workshop to help you a bit, practice storytelling. But actually, I thought that to warm up a little bit, I would ask one person to first choose a statement. So it might be a statement like I'm courageous, or I love my customers, or it might be something like life is beautiful, or life is difficult, or whatever you think is important or resonate with you. So that would be the first step, to come up with a statement about something. And then the second step is to convey the same message as in your statement, but to tell a quick story. It might be a story from your life. It might be a story that you, for instance, you watched recently a movie, or you read a book, or perhaps you watched a TV and some story like was so powerful to you that it resonated with you. You memorize it, or you remember it's memorable for you, unforgettable. And so let's start with this first step. I mean, who would like to come up with a statement? Who would like to tell a statement, an important statement? Do you have any statements? A short sentences about something.
Eric is raised hand.
Who? Yeah, please. Eric, okay.
I would say life is experienced best in person.
Life is experienced best in person. Okay, great. Excellent. Would you like to now convey the same message through a quick story?
So we have a lot of perceptions about people, cultures, what experience would really be like without having that experience. Many of us believe we know something, but we really don't. So I had a experience to travel through Turkey just recently, throughout many parts of it, and I saw a lot of things that in the historical aspects of Turkey and the perceptions of the Turkish people that I never knew about or never experienced, the rich culture and history of it, but also their own perceptions of the world. So I would have not have experienced that by reading about that or in my passings of it, by not going through and experiencing it.
All right. And if you are you able to like transform the second part into a kind of story? For instance, what a story, which means that as we will go through the next part of the workshop, the story which could contain such elements like a character, maybe a conflict, or something that is a bit dramatic, or some kind of action.
Well,
it might be completely made up. It might be completely made up. It doesn't has to be something that happened to you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I can say on one of the parts of the journey, I went to this place called Pamukkale, which was it's a famous site because it was influenced by both the Greeks and the Romans, and it had a very famous Roman baths that were there that overflow from the top of the mountain down the sides, and there's this beautiful white carbonite sulfur coating that ends up on top of it. But I thought that's all that it was. I thought it was just a geographical spot with maybe a little history, but then I realized there was, it was a site of also a martyrdom of one of the Christian apostles, and that it had this whole city and vibe around it. It wasn't just a natural environmental remnant at this point. It was actually sort of a living, breathing voice of history. And I found I was amazed by that, by being there. And I didn't get that when I read about it in the overviews. So that's would be an example of this awakening or enlightenment that you can go through by actually being somewhere. So we can't ever know sometimes. We can be aware, but we can't really know unless we experience.
Okay, that's really amazing. Thanks a lot for this. Yes, I think that was a really good example of how we can use even a very short story, a story that looks more like an episode perhaps, but it's the impact is, I think, much more interesting whenever we listen to someone who tell, especially if the stories are personal or full of conflicts or dramatic events. We always feel engaged. So as I mentioned before, we'll do this exercise one more time in the second part of the workshop. So you can think perhaps now when you listen to the next part of the workshop, maybe you could sometimes think about what kind of statement you could come up with, and then what story you could create or tell us that would convey the same message. And whenever you go into you do as a kind of research to find out what storytelling or stories do for our perception and how what kind of impact they have, you can find data like on this slide. So very often, especially when you compare storytelling with data or information, you will find this kind of information that facts and data used in presentation have a very low impact on our perception, on our, especially in our engagement and our readiness to do something, to apply certain information in our life, or make some changes, or make some important decisions. And on the other hand, when we use a lot of stories in our presentations, business presentations, our public speaking slots, the impact is much greater. I mean, people very often feel encouraged to make important decisions, to do something. They feel inspired. So that's something that it's worth taking into account, especially that when it comes to facts and data, the problem is that without a proper context that we can present certain information, let's say about our business or about statistics, about economy or personal money or businesses or whatever is important for us. I mean, the data and facts should be always presented in certain context, because without context, actually data are a bit meaningless. We can gather a lot of information and data, but if we don't put them in certain context, especially a context that is important for us and it's relevant for our audiences, then data and facts are very often completely meaningless. And storytelling has, we spoke in the beginning about three types of stories. So the third type of stories are conveyed by, let's say, by our lives, through our lives. They might be, the great stories might be told by nations or by societies, by communities. And Plato, one of the most distinguished philosophers in ancient times, said that those who tell stories rule societies. And when we have a look very carefully, for instance, and examine how nations were created, or certain big organizations, or even, you know, contemporary modern businesses, you very often will find stories that help us to feel like united, to feel like engage in certain ideas or certain things that happen in organizations. So and actually it doesn't matter if those stories are real or not, if they are made up or they are based on facts, because it's you know, actually the thing is that when we also examine the nature of our reality and what is truth, is very often we might came to the conclusion that it's very often to determine what actually is objective reality and what is truth. And by the way, about this phenomenon, if you would like to perhaps spend Saturday evening with, or depending on your time zone, of course, but or Sunday evening with a good movies, I would recommend you the first movie which help us to better understand the complexities of our perception and the difficult or challenging nature of so-called objective reality. The first movie is Rashomon by a Japanese director Kurosawa. It's really masterpiece. It's a story about a samurai and his wife. They were murdered, and then there are a couple of witnesses who tell their accounts, what they saw. And the thing is that every account is completely different. Every account is completely different. We've got the same event and we've got completely different accounts. And the quite similar, I would say, concept we can find in Orson Welles, the movie by, Citizen Kane, the movie by Orson Welles, 1941, really great movie. And this is a story about a very important person who died. And then we've got, again, a couple of accounts, and every person tells completely different story about this, the same hero. So in the first movie, we've got an event and completely different accounts. And then we've got a person, and we've got also completely different accounts. So the question is, are we able to really touch a truth, or do we deal with objective reality, or we just deal with our perception? I mean, of course, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't pursue truth, or we shouldn't just, at least we shouldn't produce fake news, right? But it's very difficult sometimes to determine what is truth. And of course, you know, we've got a lot of events. If there is a murder, we can of course agree and accept that it was a murder. If it was a very happy event, we can probably also came to the joint conclusion, if I may put it in this way, that it was a happy or positive event. But very often we encounter a lot of different issues with determining actually what was the character of event we want to describe. So that's the challenges of our reality. And because of that, stories are much better to convey certain messages, important informations about our mission, about the meaning of life, or about something that is important for us or our businesses. So that's why it's, of course, it makes sense to use data and information, but it's good to put them, as I mentioned before, in certain context, to just show them in action, that the impact will be much, much more powerful. So let's have a look very quickly at the 7 elements of storytelling. I will give you, after through Lesia, a couple of free materials, so that will be a free template about, you can use the 7 elements of storytelling as a kind of checklist. So if you want to create a good story, before you start working on it, you can check if you've got all these 7 elements, and I can assure you that it's very helpful. So the plot, the first element of a good story is something that a plot is like assembling all important elements of your story. So you assemble all elements, you check, you think a bit about your character, about the conflict, about the message you want to convey, about setting, and about everything that is relevant for your story, and try to like determine the different kind of relations and proportion between these elements. The second is character, which basically very often is like character writes stories, and especially if character is really, well designed, it will certainly determine how the story will develop. Then we've got point of view. We can tell a story from our personal point of view. We can tell a story from so-called an objective point of view, when a narrator is someone who understands very well our motivations, is able to present our thoughts and, very deep hidden, motives of our decisions. We can choose also a very interesting technique, which is to tell a story from a point of view of a person who, for instance, is a friend of main character, main hero, like for instance in Sherlock Holmes. So we learn about Sherlock Holmes through eyes of his very good friend. So it's like we feel this kind of almost intimate, relationship, and that's very interesting technique, which is used sometimes in great stories. Then the next element are settings. So settings is about, where we want to put our story. If we choose to put our story, let's say, in the space, probably it will be science fiction story. If the story will be put somewhere in a school, it will be probably a story, or it might be a story about teenagers, and so on and so on. So setting is certainly something that will determine the atmosphere of a story. Then we've got a style and word choice. It's also very effective, very, very good to have some a concept how we want to design the story using words, if it's a written story or if it's a public speaking event. So for instance, if I choose to use a very descriptive language with a lot of the descriptive terms, that I will create an almost a kind of atmosphere of contemplation of my story, because it will be a lot of words or phrases that can help me to almost like experience flavors and colors and shapes, and of course that means at the same time that the action is like slowed down a little bit. But on the other hand, if I use a very short sentences with a lot of verbs, then the feeling is like if it was a lot of dynamics, a lot of drama and very fast pace. Then we've got conflict, which is regarded very often as the essence of good story. The reality is that every one of us who goes through our lives always experience, more or less difficult situations. Sometimes we experience completely dramatic events, and we want to simply learn how other people deal with their life challenges. So this is something that makes every story fascinating, if you are able to see the conflicts between good and bad guys, between the obstacles that we need to overcome, or monsters we need to kill. Of course, these metaphorical monsters, but even if they are metaphorical, they can be also very, very dangerous. Then we've got theme. Theme is about, we can choose to tell let's say a story about a love, so that would be a love story or melodrama. We can tell a story that happens in the middle of a war, and we can tell a story about justice, for instance, that we this is something that will certainly also determine especially when it comes to the main message we want to convey through our story. And the next checklist, I would also recommend you will get a template, so you can use it if you design, let's say, your next speeches, or you want to improve something on your website. There are a couple of components of a good story. So once you read your story, you design your story, you wrote your story, and let's say that it's still, you can work a little bit and make some improvements. You can check if your story, which is, let's say, it's almost designed, if contains all these important components or aspects of a good story. So you need to check if your story is entertaining. And certainly if you've got a good character, a lot of conflicts, turning points, probably it will be entertaining. You need to make sure that your story is personal. We really like to see how other people deal with their life challenges and what it's and also I think that the reality is that every one of us lives in a slightly different universe. We are completely different sometimes. We live in the same communities, but we very often, when we learn a little bit more about ourselves, suddenly we realize that actually our even good friends see the same things in a completely different way. And it's really fascinating. And that's why we like, personal stories. We also like stories that are educational, because we are, I would say, designed to learn throughout our life. It's a never-ending process to learn something new. It might be, of course, the formal education, but I mean, in this context, more like our desire to learn, to improve all the time, to learn about some new stuff. So we need to make sure that our story will help also other people to educate a bit. Story should be methodical, which means that should be well designed. It should be easy to follow, which means that especially when we work on this plot part or stage of our story, when we assemble all elements of our story, that's a good moment to determine, different kind of relations between the elements of a story, and then to make sure that the events in our story, conflicts, characters, and everything that it's relevant for our story, that is prepared in this way that it's easy to follow, it's logical and easy to follow. And the last very important element is that it's good to check if our story can be memorable or even unforgettable. And of course, the stories that are memorable or are unforgettable are very often personal stories with a great lesson at the end that we can learn, right? So that's the way we can design memorable or unforgettable stories. So before we do our quick exercise, let's have a look very quickly on a three, I think, very good examples of business storytelling techniques. Very simple but very powerful, so you can consider it not only when you do your business, but also when you prepare your speech, or when you write a letter to your boss, or you want to negotiate something. So some of the techniques are quite universal, and you can use them in a different life situations, in different contexts. So the first, absolutely amazing, one of the most popular, is the journey hero, the hero's journey. The hero's journey is like a very universal, I would say, a structure for most of the stories we will listen to or we will design our lives, because the story, the hero's journey consists of three stages of story. So the first is the exit act. An exit act is when the main protagonist or main character of our story suddenly, let's say there is a peaceful world, there is a good guy who lives, and suddenly something happens, something horrible, and they need to deal with the horrible situation. So then enter the second act, the act of initiations, when they need to, sometimes literally, if it's an old legend or a fantasy movie, they need to kill monsters. Sometimes these monsters, or more often, they are metaphorical monsters. And then after they killed all monsters, they solved their problems, they enter the last stage, which is the act of returning. So they go back to their previous life, but with a life wisdom. They learned something very important, and now they can like go back to the previous life, but with a great experience. And because of that, of course, the future life will be much better, will be more meaningful because of the lessons they learn. The next very interesting technique used very often. So of course, when it comes to how to use it in business, because that is very important. So it's quite easy. I mean, you can imagine that there is a consumer who suddenly have a horrible problem, for instance, lack of money or something happened to their car. And then the second stage is to show, how they need to overcome different obstacles. And then finally they find us, which our business, which can deliver a great product. And this product is like the moment when they can return to their previous life with a great product or great service, and they can enjoy their lives again, but with a important lesson. So this is something that's something is very often frequently used in commercials, in sales text, and different kind of business messages. The next interesting technique is before-after bridge. So how these techniques work, it's a quite powerful way to present certain ideas or certain, or to have to influence our audiences. So we present how someone's life is miserable because of certain problems. So life might be miserable without car, or without a clothes, or without enough amount of money, or without education, or without certain medication, or whatever you can imagine. So that's we picture as someone who has a very negative experience because of lack of something, or because of problem they experience. Then in the second stage, we show how their life would look like if they didn't have this problem, right? So it's a very interesting contrast. We can tell them, we can show our, let's say, customer who has a horrible problem, and then we can picture life without this problem. And then the bridge is, of course, our product, our solution, something that we can deliver to our customers. So it's like, they had a very miserable life. Life would look great without this problem. And then we show how they can have this life, how they can achieve this stage after. So the bridge is our product or our service. Very powerful technique and very simple, as you can see. And the next very often used in sales text, especially in sales text and different kind of advertisements, is to use this very simple, I would say, 4-step process. So the first promise is our bold, it must be actually very bold statement, or our very bold promise that we are able to deliver something or make someone's life much better. And so that's the first step, which at the same time is the moment when we are able, because of our very bold promise, also grab people attention, which is very important, right? Then we've got the second stage, which is a picture of, we need to picture the life with, when our bold promise can be delivered. So how someone's life would look like if our promise would like materialize in their lives. So then we picture, we describe, different aspects of this happy life. Then the next stage is to come up with different kind of data, different kind of testimonials, facts about our product. So this is the moment then when we appeal to more like a rational part of our mind. And then the last very important stage is, of course, push, which might be also a different name for this stage, is also call to action, because in every proper business text and also a speech that it's, let's say, motivational or or has a very specific purpose, it's good to simply tell our audience, our readers, what exactly they should do, what we expect them to do, because you know, the reality is that if we miss this last stage, our audiences very often very often don't know what to do. So it's very important to remember about push or about call to action. So that was very simple 3 business techniques that you can practice and you can try, you know, in different contexts. But now, before I present 3 super effective big ideas, something that it's result of my really long research and experience with storytelling, I would go back to our exercise to give you an opportunity to practice a little bit. We had Eric with a great statement and a really good story. And as you remember in the beginning, I said, I demonstrate you 2 ways you can compare a statement with a story. I said, I'm brave, and then I told you a story about some dramatic situations when I demonstrated my courage in my life. And the second one, it was I came up with a statement, I love my customers, and then I told the story about Alice and who purchased an expensive album, and what we did when she called us before one day before Christmas and complained that the book hadn't arrived. So now it's time for you, let's say 1 or 2 person, some courageous person or brave person who would like to practice a bit and see how it works. So the first stage is to come up with a statement. So you can, whatever is important for you or whatever you would like to try today. And the next stage is to convey the same message throughout a quick story. Who would like to try? It's a really good opportunity to practice in a very friendly environment.
I see Mercedes raised hand. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thank you for that. I would like to say that I believe in miracles. Does that work? Is that a good
start? Okay.
Thank you. Now, at the age of 6, I faced a major crisis in that it looked as if my parents were heading for divorce. I'd had an idyllic childhood. My brother and I were extremely happy. We didn't want for anything. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we were very comfortable. And to imagine a life without both parents was horrific. Now, we had a bungalow on the beach in Barbados. My father had been studying in the UK for 3 years, and my mother had been left with 2 pretty average children, but she was getting tired of being without her husband to help her. And she was fed up because he wanted to do yet another year in England, which would have meant she would have been with us for 4 years and no husband. And I really began to panic because she wanted to go to America without us. This was the biggest insult to me because I thought my mom really loved me. And I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to ask, but I'd always thought independently of other people. And I was certainly very different from my friends. So I decided to go and sit on the back wall of our bungalow, which separated our backyard, as we called it, from the sea. And I looked up to the sky and I asked for a message. And I said, dear God, please give me some hope to be able to reverse this horrible situation. And I expected letters to appear in the clouds or some message to come into the sky. But something quite unique happened. And it changed my life in literally those few seconds. Because while nothing appeared in the sky, I had a feeling within me that I was looking at life differently. I was operating firstly from fear and not courage. And I was also reacting rather than creating my own future. And in a split second, I saw what I had to do. I saw that I wasn't just human. I was far more being. And the being is an eternal spirit that has far more power than the weak, programmable human. In that instant, I felt as if I had the whole world and the whole future in my hands. And I decided to think differently. I decided to visualize my mother not going anywhere. But I knew it wasn't just about visualizing. I knew I had to feel my mother's presence, and I had to feel the victory of my parents coming together. And as impossible as that seemed, at the age of 6, not quite 7, I put it to work. 2 days later, my mother received a telegram. And I remembered when she received it. She held it to her chest and she did that weird thing that Catholics do, which I could never master. And then she opened this telegram with a letter knife. And she looked at it and she put this thing against her chest and she did that thing again. And I thought, well, is this good news or not? And I said, Mom, what is it? What did Dad say? And she said only 2 words that confirmed that my life would take a brand new path of miracles. She said, your father is coming home. I don't have to go to America. We will remain a loving family. And from that day, I realized that there were 3 principles at work. First is love. These are all intangibles. You can't see them, but this is where the real power lies. There's love, this purest love. So I had to work from not selfishness, but for the whole family. Secondly, there's awareness. I became aware that we are 2 parts. We're human and we're being, and we're taught in school to focus on the human when it is the being that has the power, because that is a part of the whole field. It's eternal and it has omnipotent power. And the third thing is perception. And this is why I loved Eric's story so much, because with perception, you can turn anything into something else. You can make whatever you like out of it. And I discovered in just those few seconds, all those years ago, 70 years ago to be exact, that my power was in my hands and that I could actually create simply by feeling the reality that I wished and living within a certain alignment of purity and love and awareness. And that's the story I wanted to share with everyone. And I hope it wasn't too amateur.
Oh, wow. That's absolutely amazing. Thanks a lot for this, Mercedes.
My pleasure.
Wow, that's amazing. I feel really impressed. And I think that especially I liked, I mean, the whole story was great, and the drama and, you know, the uncertainty and tension, and then there's 3 great lessons at the end. Yeah, thanks a lot for this.
My pleasure.
Who else would like to try? As we can see, the statement was also itself powerful, right? Not only, but story was so much better. It's because story, you know, like put us in the middle of events. We are just engaged and immersed in the whole drama. It's really amazing. Thanks a lot for this. Who else? I think we've got time for. Oh, thanks, Natalia. Oh, yes. So one more person, please, and then I will quickly sum up. We've got.
May I do it?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay. My statement is that almost every failure isn't a disaster. It is just an experience that helps us in future. And probably most likely, it will bring success in future. And my story is, it's a recent story. It has happened a month ago. I'm in Ukraine, in Kyiv, that is not far from Chernobyl. Everyone knows what Chernobyl is and where it is. And I'm a journalist, and my colleagues from the foreign channel asked me to accompany them to Chernobyl to make a report about what has happened after the invasion, when Russians left. However, it was right after that invasion, and it was almost impossible to get there because all the bridges have been destroyed in that area. And there are so many small rivers in that area, so that was almost impossible to get to Chernobyl from Kiev, despite it is 1.5 hours to get there by car. However, there were some ways, and my colleagues decided to go there by all means. We hired the best driver ever in Kiev and put a goal for him to get to Chernobyl zone. It took us 4 hours because we had to find very, very different ways to get to that checkpoint, to the exclusion zone. And when we got to that checkpoint, when we saw all that rivers, all that bridges, floating bridges that already have been put on some rivers, when we saw beautiful nature of the Kiev region, when we came to that exclusion zone checkpoint, we had, guys, you don't have the permission to work in the exclusion zone for the journalists. You have to go back to Kiev and get that permission. We were negotiating with the police and the territorial defense for at least an hour until the evening has come and we had to come back to Kiev. What a disaster, you must say. For my colleagues from that foreign channel, a really famous foreign channel, probably yes, but not for me. Because in a month, the colleagues from another channel came to Kiev and asked me to help them to get to the exclusion zone. At that time, I knew everything. Whom to call to, where to apply to what enterprise, to what institution to apply to, because we have many different institutions in the exclusion zone, and every of that institution, each of them is responsible for different things, for the plant, for the zone itself, for Chernobyl city, and so on. And after that, I knew even the way how to get there. All the floating bridges, I saw them a month ago. So we got there. We got there it took us only 2 hours, not 4. We did everything except one thing. I wasn't told that to talk to the plant workers, to the plant personnel, you have to have another permission. So next time, another group of colleagues asks me to do everything, I will provide them with the best service. And I know how to do it. And probably next time we get there, we will have all Ukraine liberated. And probably we even will get to other places that are now in the news. Thank you.
Oh, wow, that's really amazing. Thanks a lot for this. We've got, probably we are out of time, so I will speed up a little bit with a quick conclusion. Thanks a lot for this story. I hope that this experience it was another evidence for every one of us how stories really work, how great impact that can have on our perception, our emotions, our engagement, and then how easy actually is to remember about stories, much better than about facts only. But now let's quickly have a look about 3 super big ideas about how you can work on your stories. The first, in my opinion, absolutely important thing that we should remember when we want to design stories that can have a great impact is to be original, but in a very smart way. when you examine very carefully the best stories, they are always similar to the other stories. And the reason is because as a I would say humanity, we've got some kind of collective way to convey certain messages, or we like develop throughout, you know, centuries of different kind of experiences, a quite effective way to convey certain messages, or to get some special results when it comes to, you know, the effect that might have on the audience perception. So I think that it's good to think about a great story as a kind of puzzles, or perhaps Lego pieces of Lego. So that means that we should be original. Of course, we should strive to tell original story, but they shouldn't be too original, if I may put it in this way. So it looks like it's not a scientific theory. It's more like my own observation that 80% of all great stories are similar to other stories, that there are some motifs taken from other stories, and this 20% is the matter of originality. So it's like taking a different kind of pieces of the same materials, like for instance Lego, and being original but within certain frame. It's very important, because actually the only super original stories are postmodern stories, which are probably you wouldn't be able to probably come up with any postmodern stories, because they are very often beautiful. The authors of the stories are very courageous, and they want to experiment, and they want to explore a different way of telling stories, but they don't have such a great impact like let's say classical stories. So I think that it's good to, so that means also, that indicates this principle is that we should, before we start designing our great stories, we should first of all do our homework, which means to go through the best stories that were told throughout ages when it comes to classical stories, and then just check what other authors what kind of stories they invented. And this is because as a speakers or as a business owners, we want to have an impact. And so it's like I would consider the question is whether we want to have impact or we want to be original. It's good to have both, of course. It's good to be at the same time very original and innovative. That there is no doubt. But I think that probably having impact, for especially for public speakers, is a little bit more important. So this is the thing you can consider. The second thing is to always design a mechanism of identification, which means basically that our characters should be likable. We need to like them a little bit. And the reason is because if we are not able to develop this kind of deep relationship between a character, let's say we are going to a movie, and if we are not able to like especially main characters, we are not interested in their striving to overcome certain obstacles. We are not we don't want to support them, then the story won't have to big impact on us. So because of that, whenever you think about a story, think about especially a main character that would be likable enough for the audience, that they could want to be in your character shoes a bit. They want to be surprised, but at the same time they want to support this character. So that's the kind of mechanism of identification. And the last very important thing, every great story is a story about hope. That's one of the things that the great stories convey. One of the most important aspects are hope. And the reason is because, let's be honest, we need hope to live, to move on with our challenges, to especially, when we go through the horrible challenges, we need to overcome a lot of obstacles. We need hope to believe that our struggle makes sense, that we will make it, that everything will be fine, that we'll move on, and everything will and with a great happy end. This is a hope that like a main fuel of our life. But on the other hand, sometimes when we go through this kind of plateau period of our life, when things are very boring, the same like a year or 2 years ago, and we don't see any effects of our struggle, our hard work, or our systematic, we try to develop new skills or develop our business or run our projects a little bit better, and we don't see any significant result. It's like a very boring, very challenging time. We also need hope. We also need hope to carry on, to do our best. And this is like, as I said, for me, it's hope. It's like a kind of main fuel of our life that keep us on track and help us to simply to do our best, to try to be the best versions of ourselves, if I may put it in this way. Thank you very much for attention. That was really great pleasure to deliver this workshop for you and listen all your great stories. I will speak with Lesia, and I will, of course, send you these templates and an ebook about storytelling. Thank you very much. I'm passing the torch to Madam Toastmaster.